I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare In the Trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today my guest is Peter Tolan, who has written or co-written the screenplays for Analyze This, Stealing Harvard, Guess Who, and has co-created the series The Job and currently Rescue Me with Dennis Leary. Thank you, Peter, for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Now, you're a nice guy, and you have a reputation for writing funny things. How did you get the nickname Thrasher?
You know, that's just, I don't really have that nickname. I think when I was directing the pilot of Rescue Me, it was cold. It was March, I think, in New York City. We're on the streets a lot. And they found a hat for me in wardrobe that said the Thrasher, which I think has something to do with the Wrestling Federation or something. So I put this hat on and I became the Thrasher, which had its own character.
Did you take anyone down?
I took a lot of people down that week and I had a lot of upper body strength that week.
Now, I also hear you're a guy who likes the ponies. Did you ever have you had a eureka moment at the track ever?
You know, I don't remember ever, you know, the track is you have to be very involved on those horses and handicapping. It takes a lot of brain power. So I think I sometimes go there to forget about all my work, but I have had notes meetings where I've been at the track. And I'm talking about people in London or, you know, other people where, you know, I'm saying to them, yeah, let's just talk and whatever notes you have, and then you can hear the trumpet go, you know, and every 20 minutes people are screaming. I'm going, where are you? I'm at home. Don't worry.
Whatever works, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you record ideas as they come to you for later use? Like, what's your process kind of as you're thinking of your next thing?
You know, I think I don't write things down. As I've progressed as a writer, I think I have some sort of a file cabinet in my head where I'm able to think about a script, an individual script or whatever, and go, oh, that's a good idea. I know where I'll put that. And it all gets ordered in my mind. And I think when I have enough stuff sort of backlogged in my head, I can actually sit down and write it without ever having any other piece of paper there. You know?
How do you know when you reach like kind of saturation point with the ideas in your head?
Really, I think your body, it's a physical thing where your body says, you better sit down now because this is so good you'll forget it or you'll forget all of it, really. I mean, just at a certain point, you're ready to go.
Does one in particular of all the ones in there kind of cycle to the front and that becomes the one that compels you to sit down and start working?
I think when you get a really good idea, that compels you to write. That's the thing that forces you to go, and it sort of makes you, you know, like a lot of writers. I can procrastinate with the best of them. I think I hold the title, and if they make it an Olympic event, I'm going to represent the U.S. But there are some ideas that are just so good, or things you can't wait to get into, that they compel you to the keyboard. You know.
Now, you came from the world of playwriting and off-Broadway productions. What sparked the transition to screenwriting? Can you remember that moment?
Yeah, I'm from Massachusetts, and I'm from the East Coast, and the whole idea of working in television or movies was sort of repellent to me at the time. I had sort of that East Coast sort of snobbish kind of thing going.
Did you watch many TV shows or go to many movies?
No, I did not watch television because I worked in the theater. I worked in the theater as an actor and as a writer in Minneapolis when I was in my 20s. We'd work at night, and we'd work pretty much every night on stage. And so why would I watch television? I just sort of fell out of the loop. So I heard like Cheers was a good show and everything like this. I rarely saw them. And when I was in New York, I was closing in on 30. I'd gotten married for the first time. And you know, starting to get a little panicked. And I was working in the theater making just fistfuls of money, as you can imagine. In the theater, it was, you know, car fare.
How did they lure you away?
I know, hard to imagine. And I was doing this act with a partner, and that was going someplace. And I started to write one-act comedies. There was a festival, a theater that did a festival of one-act comedies at the time, called Manhattan Punchline. And I thought, well, I can probably write a one-act play. I'm writing all these little sketches that we're doing. So I did, and they picked it up. And it was enough. It was off Broadway, but it was seen enough and reviewed in the Times and whatever that people sort of started to say, you know, come to me and say, you should work in television.
Did your phone start to ring?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. There was a guy named Michael Benahum, who's passed on, who was the first person who really said, you're a very glib fellow. You should really be working in television. And I didn't jump at it initially. I think a little more time passed, and I think another year of those fantastic funds in the theater piled up. And my wife at the time was looking at me going, come on, you know, and 30 was like coming fast. And so I decided, I had agents, which was a big deal, you know, because that's always a problem for a young writer. I had agents because of the act at William Morris. So you can imagine their glee when I went to them one day and I said, I think I'm going to write a spec script and try and get a TV job.
Oh, I'm sure bells went off and a disco ball came down and they had a big party in the office.
Exactly.
Were these New York agents?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they went out for drinks that night.
Oh, please. They couldn't believe their
Right.
good fortune. So so I actually was working in an ad agency and I stayed late. And I'll never forget, my ex-wife would watch television. See, I didn't, but she did, and she watched CBS's Monday night lineup at the time, which was that all-female shows. It was, I know it was Designing Women was on, and there was another thing, and Murphy Brown. And I started to watch with her because it was on, and it was a very small apartment, and there was nowhere else to go, you know? And I thought that, Murphy Brown's a pretty witty, clever show, and if I was going to write a show, I'd write that. So I've done this all wrong now. They always say never write a spec script for a show you want to work on. So I would, stayed late at the office and wrote a spec script, never having done it before on an, IBM Selectric with the correction fluid. And, I had no template. I shouldn't say that. I think I did ask my agents to get me the pilot script of the show.
Okay, just as an example of structure and how
yeah,
things
just
are laid
to see
out.
what it should look like on the page.
Right.
And I had watched the show sufficiently that I knew the characters and sort of knew their voices, and I wrote this script, and they're saying, well, and I said to them, okay, make sure Diane English reads this. like that was going to happen. And they said, well, you probably won't get hired on that show. But I did. I was the only person ever hired onto Murphy Brown off a spec script.
Wow, and that was like in the top, that show was consistently either number 1 or in the top 5, right?
Yeah, it was. And that was back, I think I was there, I wrote some episodes during the 3rd season and then was on staff for the 4th and 5th. And then the baby was born and I got the hell out.
Oh, Murphy Brown's baby?
As soon as the baby comes on,
Right.
Okay, time to go.
Is that where she jumped the shark with that show?
All shows, when they resort to the baby, it becomes a different dynamic. And Murphy Brown wisely chose to ignore the baby for the most part.
Right. Although she did get a big bounce from Dan Quayle over that, I imagine.
That actually happened during that time, yeah.
What did you take away from the Murphy Brown experience that you think helps you later in terms of your writing or the business or anything?
Well, since that was, technically it wasn't my first experience because I did take another job because of a contract dispute that Diane was having with Warner Brothers. I couldn't join Murphy Brown right away, so I took a couple of other jobs. But I don't know, if you've ever had a goal and you said, that's what I'm going to do and that's what I really want to do. So I managed to achieve that, and I think that was a big deal. I was scared because it was sort of a new world, and it was something I just couldn't believe. How was I sitting in that apartment in Brooklyn, and now how was I writing scenes that they had to build sets for, and I'd go down, it was all very exciting.
And then I imagine you needed a new goal.
I needed a new goal after that. I had to figure out what it was, though. When you reach that goal, you're so happy for initially, but...
Did your playwriting inform your screenwriting at all?
Not so much. I think for television especially, it's a different set of rules, especially in half hour, especially a show like that, which is driven by not jokes per se, but you have to hit at a certain rate. So it has its own structure, Did your experiences with acting or advertising kind of help you at all with the writing that came later? Well, the advertising, that taught me how to drink at lunch. I mean, more than anything, it just taught me how to get really just schnockered and to
Excellent.
Make it through the rest of the day. We had some clients who were real, alcoholics. But I think the acting was absolutely critical to all my writing, because especially working in that theater in Minneapolis, I was on stage, like I say, I would say 5 nights a week. On Fridays there were 2 shows, on Saturdays there were 2 shows, there were improv shows after those shows. So it was a tremendous amount of time in front of an audience, and you learn pretty quickly when to get off, when you're losing them, how much information has to be in a scene. And that was crucial. I mean, that acting, being on stage that much, really, really informed everything I do about writing, because even now, when I'm writing a scene, I go, okay, that's enough. Don't go too far. You're getting, you're going to lose them. That was really important. And I imagine it also carried over to when you started to direct, in terms of just dealing with other actors and stuff. Well, when if you've been an actor, first of all, as a writer, you go, am I really going to make people say this? Am I really gonna put these words in that person's mouth? Would I want to say this? Is it true to the character? You know, am I forcing them into a position? I'm always trying to maintain the integrity of the characters of anything that I do, and I think that comes from the acting.
What originally made you think you could be funny on the page? Like, why that genre, and when did that happen?
I always thought I was going to be an actor, and I was passable. I'm not a really good actor, you know, but I was okay. You know what makes you think you can be funny? I know what made me think I could be funny, because my parents, when I was a teenager, they would have people over and they'd have dinner, and I'd come home from a date or whatever, and they'd say, well, how did it go? And I'd do 5 minutes and I'd kill. I would kill.
To avoid the truth?
No.
Or you work in the truth with your routine?
I would work in the truth, but I would embellish, you know. But I would just kill, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, I'm making these grown-ups laugh. I gotta have something going on. I gotta have something going on. And I thought that it would translate more to being an actor and being on stage. But at a certain point, I think I am a pragmatist in show business. And at a certain point, I said, boy, I don't think I want that life. It looks interesting on the surface. And when you're doing shows in high school, it's a different thing. But to be to be dependent on others for that part or those words, or I said, no, I don't think that's me. And I said, well, maybe if I provide those words, I can jump a few hurdles, maybe, and have a little more control in the situation. And you know, it was a long process of writing, you know, musical sketch variety shows in college, and then moving to Minneapolis and doing that acting, and then moving to another theater in Minneapolis and sort of writing another version of the same thing, the same kind of musical topical variety thing that was very successful, and then saying, you know, I think I've never written a musical. I'm going to read a straight musical. And then I'm going to write a play. And all of them were produced, and I got to see them all in front of audiences, and they all ran for a good period of time. So, and then doing the show with my partner, and doing the one act. So it all grew to, you know, I hope it continues to, you know.
Is it more gratifying, do you think, to make people laugh or make people feel and laugh at the same time more than other genres, or is that the way it strikes you?
I mean, sometimes you know, I think a lot of people who work primarily in comedy at a certain point you go, well, what am I really doing? I mean, this is frivolous, and you know, it's a little unimportant, and especially when you get that input from the industry. I mean, when was the last time a comedy won an Oscar? I mean, that just doesn't happen because it's perceived as, I don't know, this, you know,
stepchild,
redheaded stepchild of entertainment.
There might be Tootsie. I'm trying to think myself of like the last time.
Well, I think it's either Tootsie or it's Annie Hall, maybe. I can't remember.
Tootsie's later, right?
Tootsie is later, I think. You're right.
But since then, it's hard. I can't think of.
There isn't one. It's even amazing to think, you know, I was watching...
Deuce Bigelow was snubbed last year, which I thought was a crime.
Viciously.
Yeah.
I don't understand that either. But even to think of, like, you know, I was watching, I think, Young Frankenstein or something, and it said, or Blazing Saddles, and it said that Madeline Kahn was nominated for an Oscar for one of those.
Right, and it's hard to imagine that now.
Hard to imagine that would happen. But then, you know, now you look at the way the world is, and you kind of go, well, yeah, maybe there's something to getting people into a situation where they can laugh. You know, so I go between the two. I vacillate between, you know, thinking I'm not doing anything worthwhile and thinking, yes, this is helping mankind in a great way.
Were you conscious of improving over time from the beginning to now in terms of your skill set, or refining everything?
Yeah, I think, you know, I have an ego, certainly. A lot of people in the business do. But I also have the same neuroses about my self-worth and my ability. And I've always, I think, had a good handle on what I could do and what I couldn't do. And I really had a sense that I had problems initially in my career with story. That it was just, I couldn't figure out. There are a lot of writers, you know, when they're younger, who can write reams of paper. They can write dialogue, and it's funny. It's funny stuff, but it didn't go anywhere. It doesn't add up to anything because they can't tell a story. And I really think I had that issue. And I'm happy to say, you know, 16 years after starting, that I'm much better. I'm much better. So I have seen that progression of ability.
Was there a point where you suddenly felt more confident in yourself? And what was that What point that you suddenly feel like, you know, this is going to work for me? And
I do remember that. I remember, and I remember thinking everybody should feel this in their life, and that is the feeling of capability, you know? Because when I told you, when I started in television, I was scared. I mean, it was a new world.
Sure.
I made a big move, and I thought, you know, in the back of my mind, there was that nagging, I don't know if I can do this. And within a very short period of time, I'm talking 4 weeks, I thought to myself, not only can I do this, but I can do this well. And this is when I wasn't that good. But internally, I said, I can do this well. And I was getting, you know, external backup of that with the person that I was working for at the time. The executive producer of that show was going, you know, you're going to be a showrunner.
Which show was that?
This was the gig that I took before Murphy Brown. It was an anthology series that Carol Burnett did for NBC called Carol and Company. Very difficult show to write because, in effect, it was a pilot a week. She was playing a different character every week. And
almost like a forerunner of a Tracy Ullman type?
Oh, yeah, yeah. A couple of weeks we did maybe 2 vignettes. It was only a half an hour. But Matt Williams produced that. And Matt said, you're going to be a showrunner. You've got all those abilities, you know, the temperament for it and the talent. And that was within 6 weeks of starting.
And Matt Williams, was he the creator of Roseanne?
Yes, he was, yeah.
And at that point on that show, the Carol and Company show, is where you felt that surge in confidence and this is going to work for you?
It must have been. It must have been. It seems early now that I think about it, but I just, you know, it may have been Larry Sanders too, because there was a different thing on Sanders where I had been recommended to that job by someone I knew who was then fired. And so then it was really just me, and I was acting in some lesser producing, you know, kind of thing as a writer. But somehow all the scripts landed on my desk, and I knew exactly how to write them.
Was that before Murphy Brown, or?
That was during.
During, okay.
Yeah, when Murphy Brown went off for the summer, I took this other gig because I just wanted to work. I just wanted to work all the time. And I was lucky enough, you know, in the business, I mean, you get a lot of work that's just work.
Right.
And then you get work that you go, this is me. This is me. I'm hooked into this. I understand how to do this.
Did you know you were working on something singular that would become like a classic in the field and one of HBO's early incredible successes?
I just knew I liked it. I knew I liked it, and then I was hooked into it, and I knew how to write it. And I really knew how to write it. I could sit and I fixed more scripts in the first season of that. And I think they'd written a pilot, and instead they ended up going with one of my scripts as the first show, I think. But that happens a lot with shows. You figure it out, you know, and you go, oh, wait a minute, this is what the show is, not that. Not the first thing we did. It's this.
Well, that must have been very gratifying, because that show was like an original right out of the box. And
sure.
That must have been great gratification for you.
It was gratifying. It was, you know, I was there from the beginning and stayed through the end, and it was really a great show. You know, I'm glad other people like it, but for me, it was a very personal kind of. I always, every now and then, I'll call Gary up because we're still friendly, and I'll say, thank you for that gift of that show. That, you know, you feel at a certain point that saved me, that kept me on the right line as a writer.
That's great. Well, it was so ahead of its time, and you think back to even the little arc of Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
Possibly taking Larry's place, and now you see what Jon Stewart is now. Yeah. But that was before all that happened for him.
I know. Mm-hmm. It was I think it influenced a lot of other shows.
Oh, for sure. Do you have a favorite script of yours that you've written that's just your personal favorite?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of the film work that I've done, I can't say that I'm a great collaborator. I work with a lot of different people, but I can't say, given, you know, the beast of filmmaking for a mass audience, that anything that I've done, any of the movies that I've written, are things that I would go, yeah, I really like that. That's me.
Because you're self-critical? Or
I'm self-critical, yes, but at the same time, I look for something to be successful on my terms, and I've come to realize over the years that my terms are very narrow, and the reason maybe why I didn't have a bigger success in broadcast television on one of the majors is because I have a much narrower band of what I find acceptable or funny or whatever. So maybe I was never destined to have a big success on a major. That's why, you know, FX and Rescue Me is perfect for me, because there's my sensibility right there.
And is there more creative freedom on an FX?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Than a network? Mm-hmm. Is there a particular episode of Larry Sanders that you're particularly proud of?
I loved some of those. Some of those shows are really, really good. And I know they're putting out another DVD of the best of things, and a lot of those shows are on there. The one that I really remember, it's a funny story too, because of how you write things, how you get ideas. Rip Torn, is great on the show. And Rip's a bit of a character, and that's putting it lightly.
Did he get stabbed, or did he stab Dennis Hopper?
I never heard the real story of that. I'm not sure, but there was a lawsuit and all.
Yeah. Either way, you don't want to be alone with those two guys in a dark bar somewhere.
Yeah, Rip's, what I love about him is that he's a little crazy, but he's also a very gentle man. He's a gardener, he hunts, he's an outdoorsman. He's a really interesting guy. But we had a huge fight at the end of one of the seasons. Huge fight, screaming. I'm very even-tempered, so I don't get into this, but I just had it. And I threw him off the set, and there was a lot of swearing and whatever. Mm-hmm. And it bugged me. It bugged me because I was so angry at him, but I appreciated his work. And I remember being at the ACE Awards, the Edsel of Awards, and sitting at the 90 awards in 30 minutes.
I remember the Cable Aces before cable was allowed to qualify for the Emmys. Mm-hmm. Meant one thing, because it was the only thing for cable shows. But now, once the Emmys accepted cable shows, it kind of meant the demise of the cable Ace.
I think they were all boxed up at that point.
But back in the day, the Ace was the Emmy for cable.
It was a big deal. And considering if you were on Sanders, I think I got 6 of them or something. Someplace. I haven't seen them in years, but
don't brag.
I know I shouldn't. But they're also a dangerous award, as anybody will tell you. You hold them upside down.
They're pointed. Come to a point. Yeah, it's a little dagger.
People put them through their foot.
Yeah.
But we were at that award thing, and I started to think to myself, at that award show, God, what is it about Rip and me? And so I decided to write a show about it. And the whole idea came to me sitting and waiting for this award. And I said to my wife, I got a great idea for a show. And then the Emmys came, and Rip and I saw each other again after a long time. And, like alcoholics, I love you. I love you, brother. Oh, it was all forgotten. And I said, I got a great show for you. And the show is that he and Larry have a fight. And Artie ends up, sort of wounded and spending the night in the studio by himself. And he does all the things he's wanted to do. He takes a karaoke machine and sings center stage. And he recites Shakespeare. And he strikes up a friendship with this Romanian janitor who speaks no English. And they become soul brothers. And then they have a fight and they break apart. And it was really, I wanted to show Artie, a guy who's working on this television show, and this janitor, a guy who's technically also working on the show, but doing the same job. Artie cleans up during the day, this guy cleans up at night. And that was, one of those was me, and one of those was Rip.
Oh, that's great.
And they can't communicate. One doesn't speak English, and eventually they bump up again. So that's all it was. And God damn it, wouldn't you know, he won an Emmy for it. So we have this big fight, and it ends up he wins an Emmy for it.
That's wonderful. We recycled it in the right direction.
I guess so.
So I want to discuss a scene that you've chosen as a particularly strong example of your work, and it's a scene from the reinterpretation of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Guess Who, with Ashton Kutcher and Bernie Mac. It's the scene where Ashton Kutcher is trying to win over his girlfriend's family, headed by Bernie Mac, and his choice for how to do that involves a series of maybe inappropriate black jokes that just kind of build and build and build. And what was the genesis of that? The creation of that scene, and where did the idea come from?
I rewrote that script. It was a fairly extensive rewrite. I don't think that scene was not in the original script, but I wanted to. Anytime you write a movie, you say, what's it really about? Forget the action, the stuff that happens on the screen. Even if it's just for you as a writer, you say, what is it really about? And I thought, well, it's got to be about race, and it's got to be about where we are right now with race relations. And I think we're still in that, informed, but tenuous, everybody's
slightly uncomfortable.
There's definitely an eggshells thing going on here, where people are like, well, I don't want to, I've got to be careful in what I say. And so I wanted to really explore that, and I wanted to put Ashton's character in the hot seat and sort of be the white liberal call to task. And I just came up with this idea of putting the entire family there. I wanted it to be generational, so I got the grandfather there too. And I thought it'd be just funny that he opens his, you know, that it starts out in that liberal way where you say, well, I heard a black joke, and I just want you to know I told that person that's inappropriate, you know. And then they go, well, then, you know, the last thing you think they're going to say is, what was the joke? Right. And then you have to tell it. So it was just perfect, you know. And it's one of those scenes when you're writing a screenplay that you sit there, and I don't laugh to myself that often, but I'm laughing. I'm having, you know, you're having such delight at putting this person in this situation. And I actually left that movie at a certain point. There was a lot of rewriting that was going on, and some of it I didn't necessarily agree with, and at a certain point I said, you know what, I think I've done everything I can do. But I said, you've got to make one promise to me. I said this to the director, Kevin Sullivan. One promise, that you won't change that scene, that will stay exactly the same, and it did, for the most part.
That's interesting, so that you felt the need for a scene that really summed up the entire reason for being, kind of, for what his character goes through in the movie, and you found a way to do it really in one scene, which is masterful.
I wanted this, it's not a movie about anything really. You know, it's really about a guy and a girl and their families, and that's really what it's about. So it's not, I would say, an incredibly distinguished piece of filmmaking, but that scene, I said, let's have this scene so we can say it's about something, you know? And oddly enough, I remember I had 2 papers delivered to my home back then, the New York Times and the LA Times, and they both didn't like the movie, but they said, there's one scene. So I was like, okay.
Where did the idea for the joke-telling scenario come from?
I maybe had that same situation in my life one time. I know that I remember I had a grandmother, as everybody did, who was a racist. I mean, you know, we were watching the Olympics one time, and there was a black girl who was skating, and she said, you know why they can do that? Their ankles are stronger than ours. And we all went, oh, come on! That's wrong. You can't say that, you know, but she was a sweet, dear bigot.
Right, there's one in every family.
Exactly. So I probably remembered her because Ashton Kutcher says it was his grandmother who said something about this daughter. It said she had I think like a pretty little nappy head or something, and I thought, well, that's really inappropriate, but something that my grandmother would have said.
Did your grandmother date Robert Byrd or something?
You know, she just would go to a rally like every Thursday night. We never know where she went, but she came back smelling of smoke.
So that's how you found your entry point, kind of into that scene, is personal memory and your grandmother.
Yeah, I wanted it to be relatable, and I thought people would go, well, yeah, everybody's got a grandmother who's, you know, hopefully as the years go by, that won't be the case, but in my generation, certainly, people had a grandmother who'd say, well, you know, oh, please, I can't. But then the idea that you would get corralled into actually telling the joke, that's what is wonderful.
Did you know when you were writing that you were writing for Ashton Kutcher and Bernie Mac?
I did. Yes.
And does that make it easier when you know the actors that you're writing for, or does it not impact the way you write or the dialogue or anything? If
you're writing for actors, you sure should know their voices. So I knew Bernie from his show, and Ashton, I think I'd seen him do. I must have seen one of his movies before, but I actually reacquainted myself.
Not Punk? You're not a big Punk fan?
I have not. I don't.
Because this is a Punk right now. John Kim.
Oh, Ashton, hello. Right. No, I don't know. I think I reacquainted myself with some of his work, and maybe some of Bernie's too. I maybe watched the show a little bit, just to get the voices clearly in my head.
Are there any drawbacks to writing with actors' voices in your head in terms of your own creativity?
No, not really. I mean, if you can mimic, if you can mimic a voice, or if you can really understand a person's voice, you can write to it fairly easily. In fact, I do think it makes it easier. The only problem that I ever remember having with that was on the Sanders Show, because early on, when we were first doing it, you'd need to get celebrity guests, and you'd call them up and they go, well, who am I playing? You're playing you. And a lot of people wouldn't do it. They'd just drop out right then because they could not and would not play themselves. So you'd have to write the script for William Shatner, and you'd put Shatner, and you'd have to make very specific kind of jokes in his voice and send it off. He'd say no. The script would come back. You'd say, okay, now it's going to be this person. You'd write it for them, send it off. That's the only time I remember it being a detriment.
Right. That's interesting.
When they say no.
Mm. Did you have all the black jokes readily at your command? Did you have to do research? Or
I'm proud to say I did not have any of those jokes.
Did you go to Grandma and say, hey, Grandma, I need a few?
Well, I went to her grave and prayed and said, please tell me.
And there was a lightning bolt and they rained down.
What can I say about the Schwartz's Grandma? But nothing. No, I did what any self-respecting person would do. I went on the internet. I just went to Yahoo or Google.
www.blackjokes.com.
I just went black jokes. And believe it or not, there's sites.
Is that where the Adam and Eve one came from?
I think so. I think they all came from that. They came from that site, and some of them, of course, are so scurrilous you couldn't use them. But
now, can you just liberally lift them and not have to like pay for them?
I don't think anyone's taking credit for those jokes. I don't think it's hold on now, son, I wrote that. I don't think anybody's doing that.
Right.